All right, we're bringing up the second panel of the day. We're continuing our discussion of sports investment, sports finance, sports funding. What a great first panel. Just so many great perspectives, thought leaders in the industry. We continue that right now. I'll quickly introduce them just by title, but they'll talk more about themselves. Larry Ferazani's here, Deputy General Counsel from the NFL, is with us today, as well as Ken Shropshire. Here's Ken. I worked with Ken at Wharton. Ken is known throughout the industry as a thought leader in sports business. Also with us today, Michael Senders from Davis Polk. He'll talk about working on so many deals that have some of the major, most expensive deals in the history of sports franchises. Also with us today, Stephen Elmore, Vice President of Morgan Stanley. And David Connolly's here from PlayFly. PlayFly, a big partner of Villanova. David's been very helpful, friend of the program. Some of our students, like Nick behind me, work with him over at PlayFly. And moderating this panel are two of my star students I want everyone to know and meet, and I want to introduce you to Lindsay Zimmerman and Nick Pilny. So welcome to the second panel.
Thank you. Great. Thank you guys so much for being here. We'll just jump into it. So can each of you just go down the line and give a brief overview of how you broke into sports initially? Some of you have a background like from a law firm setting. Was sports always in the back of your mind? How did you get back? So we can start with David.
Thank you, Nick. Sports was never part of the agenda. It just happened that I was at a dinner with the senior partner of our law firm when I was a mergers and acquisitions partner at Sherman & Sterling, and he mentioned having had breakfast with somebody that morning. And he was a philanthropist in Newark, New Jersey, very successful private equity investor, and I had been a high school teacher for a while. And he would pay for some of the students at the school where I worked to get tutoring, and I tutored one of the students, so I knew who Ray was. Ray Chambers is his name, and when I mentioned to our senior partner that I knew him, I said, I'd love to do work for Ray. I really respect what he does. And it turned out, and I didn't know it at the time, he owned half of the New Jersey Devils, and it turned into me doing a lot of work for Ray on the New Jersey Devils, which morphed into doing a lot of work for Fenway Sports Group and the Red Sox ownership group, and that is how I got started in sports, and it was really the result of keeping my ears open as I met people and worked with people at our law firm, and jumped on an opportunity when it popped up. I was very, very lucky and very happy that it worked out that way.
Good morning, and thank you for having us out here. I also didn't have any grand plan of entering sports when I was in law school. When I went to school, I wanted to be a trial attorney, and I came out of law school, and my path between law school and the NFL included being a state prosecutor in the Bronx, being a special agent for the FBI, being a federal prosecutor, and working in a law firm. And after that period where I proved I had zero attention span and moved from place to place, but trying to figure out where I wanted to find a home, my last stop as an AUSA in the Eastern District of New York, having been an FBI agent, I got most of the great cases. The agents would bring their better stuff in. My path had led me to know that I did not want to work in a firm. And so when I was getting ready to jump into the private sector, I was trying to figure out what could be a good home. And there was a case involving some NFL players. I was able to be introduced to the prior head of the management council who was looking for someone to handle litigation within our CBA. And having just finished a death penalty case and terrorism financing cases, I figured I could do that. And that started an 18-year career, which has been wonderful, and I strongly recommend careers in sports. But any students that are here, you're light years ahead of where I was because I hadn't even put this on the radar.
Hey, everybody. So two things. One, it was always my plan to work in sports. I just didn't know how I was going to do it. And then I'm not a lawyer, so you're going to hear a lot of different stories here and been around it, but I've got a different perspective. So yeah, look, I was a college athlete and wanted to play sports as long as I could, grew up around the game. And I think I had two pivotal points. The first was when I had a chance to extend my college career and get a master's in sport management at the time, right after I graduated undergrad. And during that program, I realized that, it wasn't just about coaching or maybe being in a front office on that side. The business of sports at that time was vast. It's clearly more vast than today than it was back then. But I learned about the marketing, sales, promotion, different revenue generating elements, community, and it was there where I realized, okay, if I'm going to go into sports, it's going to be in a different capacity. Got to intern at minor league club, kind of something different than I had been used to, while also working in basketball, where I ended up getting my first job in sports. So that was the first part. I think learning about the business, but wanting to still kind of have that itch to be in the mix of basketball operations and coaching and kind of like that ilk. But when I did go that route, even though I left some years later into what I'm doing now, and I can get to that quickly, but what I learned in coaching, and I'm sure, look, we're at Villanova, have a rich basketball tradition, and every program is different. But where I had to learn how to get stuff done with limited resources, how to be in a fast-paced environment, high-stakes environment, dealing with different kinds of people and personalities, building relationships, and wearing many different hats. And so where my experience kind of came from was in that setting of, having the main goal is to win and to be successful, but finding different ways to make those things happen. And even though, like I mentioned, I got out of coaching after 5 seasons, I moved on to a marketing firm where I worked with different clients in sports, media, entertainment, got to really build on what it looked like to build brand storytelling, understand business development, corporate partnerships, strategic partnerships, what made businesses go. And then when I got this role that I currently have now, I've been at Morgan Stanley for about 3.5 years. It just so happened that in the wealth management division on this team, they were looking for someone who can come in and be a hybrid, who understood the business of sport, but who can also, have a background in marketing and storytelling and brand strategy. And I think just the mix of those experiences personally and professionally really helped. And that's kind of how I am where I am today.
So I am a lawyer, so I fit into the other camp of this not really being planned, not having sort of an early plan to be in the sports world. But I did have a plan to be a lawyer and to work at one of the New York City firms. So I went to law school, and right after law school, I ended up at Davis Polk in the M&A group, sort of doing ordinary course corporate work for both strategic and private equity clients. And early in my time at Davis Polk, I was, by sheer sort of luck or coincidence or what have you, staffed on, by virtue of our sort of centralized staffing system, staffed to work on a few matters for the New York Mets, then owned by the Wilpon Katz families, which over time evolved into a sale of that team and representing owners of a sale on that team and working with some partners at the time as an associate, and learning a lot about how sports deals are done on the legal side, including something which was fundamental and sort of was a learning curve at the time, but how you interact with leagues as part of doing control sale transactions or even minority sale transactions. And suddenly I became sort of like the expert among the associate group at the firm within the M&A group with experience in doing sports deals. And when the next phone call came in, I was sort of like staffed to help on that, and relationships developed organically, started, getting to know some of the owners that have multiple teams where we did some work for one of the teams, and then that expanded into something working for another team, and just kept growing sort of organically from there, and building on experience and building out sort of a niche expertise in the practice as part of the broader M&A environment at the firm.
Hey, good morning, everybody. The abridged version, grew up in the Crenshaw district of LA, and was always going to be in sports. I was going to be in the NFL. I was going to be O.J. Simpson. The good OJ. I was the good OJ, if there is such a thing. I was going to play in the NFL, and then I was going to be a broadcaster. That was my plan. And about sophomore year at Stanford, all-state football player, all that stuff going in. Sophomore year, coach tells me, you're never going to start at Stanford University. So I started not being Michael Jordan, who would have been motivated by that, I said, oh well, I better do something else. So I started trying to figure out how else can you be involved in sports, and it was at a time when sports agents were really starting to have a moment. And so I said, hey, maybe I'll go to law school. A lot of people are going to law school. So I went to law school with the specific purpose of working in sports. This is in the late 70s. It wasn't a thing, wasn't a course. There was actually the first kind of horn book by We Start that was there. I went and got that book. The only thing I did extracurricular in law school academically, I read that thing without a class. Ended up at a law firm in LA, Manat Phelps, Rothenberg and Tunney at the time. Steve Greenberg, now the big wheel at Allen and Company, was one of the big lawyers there. Arn Tellem was there. And one of the partners, as I first came in, said, hey, I'm teaching this class at Southwestern Law School. I can't do it. Wouldn't you like to teach this class? And it was a sports law class. So the first couple of weeks at the firm, 2 weeks later, I'm teaching a class at a school where it's largely law as a second career types, but I had to learn everything about sports law and stand there as a 26-year-old teaching kind of 30-year-olds about this space. So that's really how I immersed myself in that. Fortunate enough to get a job with the LA Olympic Organizing Committee, LA 84, not LA 28, and had two specific jobs there. And I just want to put a bow on kind of how I focus on what I focus on, and really even a clear revelation that's come forward to me in the political times that we're in, that we need to say these kinds of things out loud. I was the number 2 person negotiating sponsorship and licensing agreements for the '84 Olympics. So the first really successful sponsorship and licensing sporting event. I ran, after we got those deals done, the most televised sporting event of the games at the time, boxing, in the 1984 Olympics. I was 26, 27 years old doing that. The games ended, and I've never said it this way, I could not get a job in sports, and a lot of my colleagues did. And just as I was a center in football, just as I look back and I look at the photos and say, hey, you never notice you're the only black guy on the offensive line. Well, I was the only black guy leading a sport. I was the only black guy that was negotiating those contracts. But in the early 1980s, jobs were difficult enough to get then, but I was not getting one. Ended up practicing on my own, pretty successful, and came to the Wharton School, had an opportunity that I thought would be a couple-year venture in 1986. And since that time, continued to immerse myself in sports, had some tremendous opportunities. At this point in life, I've been an advisor with Arctos, with Overtime Elite, with the NFL and some other places along the way. So it's been a tremendous journey, but it's one that I don't want this day to go by without us recognizing what's going on in the world today and how it is a real thing that people have been held back, that have been highly qualified, and that continues to happen.
Great, thank you so much. Shifting towards our more broader focus of sports financing, each of you either have been a part of or currently are a part of this evolution in regard to sports financing. We would just love to hear what your day-to-day specifically looks like in each of your respective roles. Larry, we can start with you.
Obviously, the NFL is very conservative, and we've just started to open the door to private equity and buying into our teams. And I was fascinated by the earlier panel, and I think Connor said, the DNA of the NFL, the fundamental origin of the league, and I believe the success of the league is in the fact that we have always been having the concept of controlling ownership. And there's always been one person or family that has been, where the buck would stop with a team. And not only does that occur within the individual team, but at the league level, although we have a very strong commissioner, the decisions that will shape the future of the league are made by owners in committees and then in meetings. I've often said obviously I think we have the greatest sport in the world, but a close second is if you could watch some of these owners' meetings and watch the debate, the politicking and the back and forth between owners about how they want their league to proceed, and the staff then will discharge that. I think we were very mindful of the fact that how do you start to recognize the incredible growth and the value of the franchise? How do you allow these owners to monetize a percentage of that? How do you address things like estate planning and so on and so forth, without losing the core principle of the league, which is that there's a family or a person responsible for making those hard decisions, the decisions that we're all 32 are equal, and how do you make certain sacrifices individually for the collective good. So everything that we've done in this space is trying to apply the old school rules, from minority investors and ensuring that there's no competitive impact or competitive balance. How do you apply that to this brave new world? And so I'm on the labor side. My job is to run the management council. We're responsible for the negotiation, administration, and enforcement of our CBAs with players and game officials. It's pretty much defines all aspects of the player's role. So you ask, well, what does that have to do with private equity? We've spent an amazing amount of time taking a look and working with Jay Bauman and the folks on our business side to ensure that the rules that apply to all owners are going to apply to the best they can to the private equity companies, without tipping or somehow inadvertently creating rights to access information that is incredibly sensitive and very well guarded. So things like ensuring that there's a bright firewall between these private equity companies that are investing in the football side of the operation. One of the great challenges that we have in the NFL is salary cap protection, ensure that there's no circumvention. So how do you now have a whole new group of people coming in and ensuring that they're not somehow trying to tip the balance on the team that they've invested in? It's a challenge. It's not as big a challenge as what the NCAA is going to be facing when they're trying to figure out boosters and so on and so forth. But my role really is trying to make sure that the football rules are not disrupted by this brave new world, which is incredibly important that we're able to kind of figure out how to tap this in.
So at PlayFly, PlayFly was founded in 2020 during the pandemic. Our principal business objective when we started was to enter into the college multimedia rights business, which what we do here for Villanova, one of our long-term partners, is we help sell on behalf of the university all the corporate sponsorships related to the athletic program. And it helps provide some of the funding for the athletic program, and it's a very important part of the budgets for the athletic departments at the schools we represent. University of Southern California, Auburn University. We just recently won the right to represent Texas A&M. We have another side of our business, which is TV media ad sales, and we're the outsourced partner for the ad sales for the local broadcasts of every Major League Baseball, NBA, and NHL teams' local games. And so we sell anywhere from 40 to 60% of the TV spots and sponsorships you see on every one of those games in the local market. And to one of the things that was discussed on the panel before, that there's a massive ecosystem around sports that is required to make it run and to provide the capital that's needed for owners to satisfy those budgets, to pay the players what they deserve. Also in the college area, very much on the forefront of everybody's minds these days. And we at PlayFly, and with the help of Nick and Dante, who's a Villanova law grad, who's one of our attorneys as well, we are constantly working on sponsorship agreements and helping our partners drive the revenue, create the revenue and cash generating opportunities to fund the franchises. And with so much of our business in the college area, and with the advent of NIL and the House settlement, which we'll see at some point in the near future, and the ability to actually, out in the sunlight and for everybody to see, pay athletes to play at the schools, our school partners need capital in order to make their budgets and to recruit the athletes and to put those competitive teams on the field, on the court, in the pool, wherever it may be, so that the alumni base can be continue to be as passionate about the schools as they possibly can be. And it was interesting to hear on the panel before a lot of discussion around the cash flows of pro teams, and the cash flows don't necessarily meet the valuations. And I think that's all understandable from an ordinary course business metric. But now we're seeing college athletic programs being looked at by private equity investors as something to invest in, and whether it is an asset that can be investable, and I think it's one of those very interesting areas where we'll see how it evolves. There are a lot of very smart people who are looking for opportunities to invest in college sports, and we spend an awful lot of time at PlayFly thinking about how we can participate in that, whether it's good or bad for college athletics, whether it's good or bad for individual athletes, and it's a fascinating time to be a part of sports, both as a lawyer and as a business person.
I can go, yeah. So on my side, as one of the sort of lawyers who focuses on representing buyers and sellers of teams, whether it be minority stakes or controlling stakes, I spend most of my time focused on structuring acquisitions, given where valuations are today, and then of course documenting them. So one of the more recent control sale transactions that I was involved in was the representing Josh Harris and his partners in acquiring the Washington Commanders, which was sort of widely publicized as one of the more structured acquisitions from a financing perspective. We had lots of conversations with Larry's colleagues, Jay Bauman, Cyrus Gavi, and even the commissioner of the NFL as part of structuring that. But effectively, what I operate with is an understanding that, let's say, some of my clients on the buy side who are interested in acquiring a team are limited by, one, the valuations of teams where they are. We're getting to a shorter and shorter list of individuals that have the personal net worth sufficient to acquire a team individually without any kind of finance backing. If we think like acquisition of the Denver Broncos by the Wharton family, that's one of the sort of limited examples. That universe of people is shrinking. So most other buyers need to come up with a structured way to acquire a team, and sort of traditional principles of M&A that I apply in my non-sports work, sort of leveraged transactions, don't really work in the sports world, right? Most leagues have significant limitations on how much debt you can take on and impose on a team. In the NFL, fluctuates over time, but generally speaking, $700 million of debt plus an extra $500 million that can be acquired, that can be borrowed specifically in connection with an acquisition, right? If you think about a $6 billion plus acquisition with only $1.2 billion of that coming via traditional debt financing, you have to finance the rest somehow, whether it be by virtue of equity partners, in which case you're in the world of limitations from the league from the leagues more broadly on how many equity partners you can have on a team, what kind of rights they may have, and then faced with the challenge of explaining to very significant minority partners who are investing several hundred millions of dollars that they can't actually have much control rights because of the fundamental principles that there has to be one single controlling owner. So most of my time is spent around working through the structuring of how to actually bring a buy-side or sell-side deal to life. And then the more traditional sort of M&A elements, one of the things that is interesting about practicing with sports transactions as fundamentally an M&A lawyer is that many of the principles are still the same as would apply to any other transaction. So how to sort of allocate liabilities of a team in the context of a transaction, who is responsible for those liabilities, a seller or a buyer, how do we structure around that? The Commander's another good example of that, where there's been a well-publicized historic set of issues that the team has faced with respect to league and governmental investigations, et cetera. So you work on sort of traditional legal M&A principles of negotiating how to allocate those things, negotiating, understanding sufficient information about the team to enter into the acquisition, et cetera.
So on our side, because we're in the wealth management business, and our global sports and entertainment group, our focus is niche, right? So it's in a division that's 11 years old, and established with the idea that athletes and entertainers, coming into this unique lifestyle in different ways, need that tailored expertise, tailored advice. So definitely athletes and entertainers are at the core of our business, and with our financial advisors who are designated as global sports and entertainment directors, they're accredited and qualified to handle the unique and complex needs of these clients, right? Whether it's different earnings profiles, different needs, different career spans, of course, and so on and so forth. But over time, what's been interesting, and even in the time I've been there, is that the scope has grown tremendously. So athletes and entertainers, but it's also executives and entrepreneurs, sports and entertainment leaders and decision makers who have become clients. And because of their profiles and because of what they're doing, there's a lot of similarities, but there's also a lot of differences. So from that standpoint, my job and our team's job is to help support the advisors who work with these clients. And because we have lawyers in the room and prospective lawyers in the room, financial advisors and lawyers and other people on this kind of team structure of each talent and each entity go hand in hand, making sure that your affairs are in order, that you're managing your finances and your business properly, that you're protected against any sort of exploitation and things like that. But we also deal with early on, like with education, dealing with financial education and going in and starting early to make sure that we get in and are preparing young athletes and entertainers before they hit it big and get to that spot. But also a big part of what I do in supporting the advisors and just supporting our business is trying to build our business at scale through whether it's through corporate partnerships, strategic positioning, brand positioning, through, like I mentioned, storytelling earlier, connectivity within the industry. And we've done a lot of things with different organizations, whether it's Sports Lawyers Association or others, to kind of help facilitate those interactions, all in the name of, like I said, growing the business, but also supporting the client. So that's a big part. But what I will say is what we've seen on the wealth side, at least from our division, again, it's niche, but in the space is how much of the firm is being kind of activated to support the need for whether it's needing, a demand in investment or wanting to get in different ways. And so examples I'll use as it relates to this panel are on the wealth side. While I'm not a banker and we don't work every day with sports and entertainment bankers or TMT bankers, there's been more connectivity because of client demand. When it comes to raising capital for a specific deal, if it's a private deal, we have a solution to, put it on our platform and let buyers and sellers trade privately. This is something that's pretty new within the last few years. And in that, you're seeing a lot more sports, entertainment, media kind of deals, be at the forefront. And for us, it's a big part of kind of facilitating those. And the same thing goes with, our alternatives platform, right? Another form of investment, kind of like we're talking about in privates. We're said to have the largest alternatives platform on the street, and that covers everything. But again, the demand for getting more and more sports funds and related funds on the platform has been terrific, and it's been kind of, just in the 3.5 years has been a huge source of growth. So for us, being able to be in the middle of advising there, helping facilitating some that might not be traditional, but we know because of what we're doing might be more attractive. Obviously, they're all diligenced and heavily kind of background, but just seeing kind of where that's gone in the last even 3 to 5 years has been instrumental for our business.
So I'm doing my best to do nothing every day, but I'm quite successfully pull that off. But I guess the 3 or 4-ish buckets that I'll mention. Some of the lead director at Moelis and the investment bank, which is involved in advising on a number of these types of deals. I don't personally get my hands dirty and do the work, but I'm around it and kind of see that kind of work and understand what's going on there and who's involved. I mentioned I was an advisor with Arctos as they from the beginning, so really got a close look at the whole idea of this private equity piece and the idea of the importance of the NFL making the decision that they made. So entry into that via that path. As my day-to-day work as a professor, I wrote a book back in the late 80s, I think it was, called In Black and White: Race and Sports in America. One of the chapters looked at the absence of specifically African-American ownership in sport and kind of this dichotomy of you got all these people of color on the field of play, but what's happening in ownership. And the thing that I inject into this conversation is that issue still exists. And there are, I think there are a number of terrific efforts that have been made in recent times to try to fix that, especially in the NFL more so than other leagues. Not just because you're here, but it is the reality, and not because I was a consultant there. It really does. It falls short there too, and I'll kind of mention the why. And the case is when I wrote the book in the 80s, 90s, I mean, you could buy the Clippers, for example, with $13.5 million. Donald Sterling buys an NBA team. I mean, I could randomly pick 5 of you, and we could figure out how to get $13.5 million in this room. With today's number $7-8 billion. I don't know insult, but I don't know who's in this room. I don't know if we could figure that out. But the bias that existed when teams were accessible is very different from what's going on now. If you can come in with a check today, there is a great chance that you have the opportunity to be successful. And one of the pieces of, well, how do you address this? If you do want, and again, the White House tells us we don't want this, but if you do want greater diversity in terms of ownership in sport, how do you do it? And these limited interests, this private equity path, is the space that gives you some space to think about it. And the question is there value to that? If you're not in the NFL, if you're not one of the 32 in the room actually making the decisions, is there some value in that? I think that there is, and I think it's something that as we talk about this, we should contemplate how do we address that issue of equity. And I say that it's not a sports problem. Forbes has the recent list of billionaires, and I think there were 23 black people globally, largely Africans, largely Nigerians, in that list, and not just the African Americans in there, but I would bet after the stock market of the past couple of days, these were kind of lightweight billionaires, many of them, the 1.6 or whatever, and if their portfolio was positioned like many, they may have dipped off of the billionaire list as a result of that. So there is that issue to think about, just the absence of people with that kind of wealth in general, and how do we get more of a diverse group in terms of people controlling these games that we love.
So, Michael, you specifically talked a little bit about this when you talked about the Commanders and the valuation of professional teams. What factors are contributing to the rising valuations of professional sports teams or even in college athletics, and how are valuation methods changing?
So, to echo some of the points from the earlier panel and to put a finer point on it, at least in the professional sports leagues and in the major U.S. sports leagues, one of the things that is absolutely incredible and always has been to me is that, as was mentioned on the earlier panel, sort of traditional valuation methodologies, discounted cash flow methodologies, et cetera, are totally out the window. People, as a practical matter, when investors talk about valuations for doing sports transactions, so sort of changing, ownership stakes changing hands, in what is mind-boggling to me, people talk about the Forbes valuations for teams. So literally what a third-party publication with relatively limited insight into financial statements of individual teams values teams on a public basis. Literally, when we talk to clients about valuing things and how transactions are done, oh, we'll buy a stake in this team at a 10% premium to whatever the Forbes valuation is. When we work on negotiating anything like put call rights with respect to future transactions involving sort of future transfers of stakes in teams, we talk about, well, what if Forbes isn't around then? We should probably pick the equivalent publication because something is going to be publishing things then. So at least in my day-to-day, while a lot of my clients' work is done to actually zone in on cash flows and understand financial position of team, as a matter of actual valuation for purposes of transfers of ownership stakes, a lot of it is tied to Forbes valuations and, frankly, pure sort of supply and demand. Generally speaking, investors, at least in the major leagues, which is what I've historically dealt with, I welcome others' thoughts on sort of the college athletes and sort of some of the smaller leagues, but a lot of it is driven by who is interested in acquiring a team and how much they're willing to pay for it, and the extent to which they want to focus on their acquisition, putting some valuation that can be reported as the highest valuation ever paid for XYZ. I mean, I think it's not coincidental that the Celtics valuation is $50 million higher than the Commanders valuation, which was sort of like the last largest deal done.
Just to jump on to some of that, I think one of the reasons why some of those metrics aren't necessarily the most relevant is that if you're looking at, pick your Best Buy, for instance. You've got a store, and Best Buy depends on customers coming and going, and those customers can switch out and go to, Walmart to get their TV instead of Best Buy. If you're a fan of a team, you're a fan forever. Whether it's a pro team, you don't really find people switching from being a Giants fan to an Eagles fan, as much as we like to see Saquon Barkley be incredibly successful down here. But fandom is forever, and that's part of what gets monetized and what generates the passion and generates the value, and I think is part of what helps remove the valuations and what price the next person will pay from those core financial metrics that are part of the team. And it's the same thing with college. My college wasn't a big athletics program at Holy Cross in Massachusetts, but I'll always be a fan of the Crusaders and the basketball team and the hockey team and the football team. My brother went to Notre Dame, and it's probably 95% of what he thinks about when he's not, thinking about his family and work. And that passion is irreplaceable. Nobody has that passion for Walmart except for maybe the Wharton family and some of those, billionaires that are on the list that you were just referring to. But when it comes down to sports teams, it's everything for people. And I think that's really what drives the value and the passion.
David,
Real quick to add to that, I mean, there's a whole reason why, but I think you mentioned sports teams, and a lot of folks have said you got to look at them. They're not teams. They're entities, whether they're technology hybrids or real estate companies. Like, they've taken on this element of being multi-purpose companies. So media rights distribution, media rights deals that are locked in throughout all the major leagues. NBA made 2.5 times their last deal over the next 11 years. NFL's got probably the most contracted TV revenue coming in. MLB, NHL all have big media rights deals, but the commercial real estate opportunities, I just want to add to that because I know that's been fascinating. Like, the core asset is the team and the venue, and those venues are bringing in not just the core event night in, night out, but multiple different types of entertainment events. They galvanize community in different ways, and then the real estate around these venues, whether it be at Golden State or in Minnesota with the Vikings and numerous other places. Just in short, you've seen that operation become a lot more mature, and it's been kind of the wave in a lot of things, not to mention some of the marketing and global expansion that a lot of teams in the sport have, and some of the teams have been, and some of the organizations have been really good at being able to marry the worlds of their IP and that marketing reach to make their brand stronger and that brand affinity that much more powerful.
David, we'll start with you on this one because we mentioned engagement, and I know one of the big things PlayFly does, and especially, through my time at PlayFly, engagement is a big thing when what drives revenue from a collegiate standpoint and also from a professional team standpoint. Could you just speak to the engagement strategies that teams or leagues, or more specifically colleges, are employing with alumni or fans to add to this it's not new now, but we see this, big collective push, and ultimately we won't know what that will look like following House, but I would love to just hear you speak to how colleges are maximizing that engagement.
I think each college is taking, many of the colleges are taking different approaches. They realize that they have these massive alumni bases that are completely passionate about their fans, and they can't get enough information about the football program. Or Penn State, their hockey team was playing in the semifinals for the Frozen Four last night. The Penn State alumni base can't get enough information about that. So the athletic directors at these big programs, as was alluded to in the last panel, aren't just administrators of sports programs. They are running a sports marketing and media business. And it is more than just athletes who are getting scholarships to come play in various sports. They have a multi-million dollar business that has all kinds of different constituencies, from the fan base to the players to the rest of the university. And so they're looking for ways to engage their fans. And we spend time with some of our university partners and some of our some businesses that we are associated with, developing content like the NFL's Hard Knocks series. We do series with some of our school partners, which are behind a paywall, and the alumni can pay to get access to Hard Knocks type content about the football program, soccer program, volleyball, men's and women's lacrosse, and we'll embed multimedia journalists with all the programs, and they're creating content on a weekly basis so they can get out there and provide that information to the alumni base, and people will pay for it because they love to learn and see as much as they possibly can see about their school programs. And on the pro side, we are, as I mentioned earlier, partnered with every NHL, NBA, and MLB team to help sell their advertising. And other than the NFL games, which are the highest rated programs in the market during the season, the highest rated program in every market each week, day in and day out, are the NBA, NHL, and MLB games. So if you're an advertiser and you want to reach a broad audience across the country, we're able to take somebody's ads and put them in front of the most engaged and most attentive audience in each market on a nightly basis. And that's because fandom is the most important, most consistent part of people's personalities in a lot of ways, and one of the places where they're most engaged. And it doesn't rise or fall with the economy. It doesn't rise or fall, with other factors. It's one of those things that is just absolutely permanent and a complete passion point for people.
I think just on that last point, as far as the ability of these colleges to have fan outreach, I've had two daughters at Notre Dame, and when you look at what they did, they were ahead of the curve. They were marketing 100 years ago. They had the movies, they had TV, and they were light years ahead of the pro leagues. And so it's really going to be interesting to see as college sports develops, and the college athlete increasingly are on a series of one-year contracts, and you don't have the ability to develop necessarily an affinity where you're watching a young student athlete kind of develop and stay with your team and ultimately compete for a championship. How that's going to impact the college's ability to continue to drive marketing and fan avidity, and most importantly, donor dollars. So I think that's kind of a fascinating development over the next.
Yeah, it's a big challenge for the athletic directors. The 1 year, the constant free agency period is going to be a big challenge to maintain some of those identities, and it will be interesting to see what it does for the alumni connection and the general fan connection to the players.
Ken, maybe you want to start with this one, but do you foresee this trend of private equity and investor funding of sports continuing on a larger scale over the next decade?
Yes, I mean the idea of, I mentioned the kind of values in the 80s. The idea that the value of these teams are going to continue to increase is clearly going to be where you're going to find the capital, as there are fewer individuals. I mean, the desire of all the leagues, if we could have single owners and we have one person to turn to, that would be ideal. But as we need more capital in there, we've got to find these different paths to get greater capital in there. So the idea of private equity or whatever, we didn't always have private equity sort of in that name, whatever the next iteration of that is. I used to be the predictor that the next media rights deal wouldn't be as big as the last one. But it's become so clear that sport is going to continue to grow in a way that we can't predict. That is, again, with the NFL, is the revenue number approaches that $25 billion number that the commissioner was looking to years ago. That people thought, he can't be serious. Well, he is serious, and here comes that number that we've been looking to. So the idea of different sources for capital, whatever it might be, that's continues on into the horizon.
Yeah, and to add, similar to that, one of the things that we're seeing in the market as a whole, in the financing market, is that private credit funds have been sourcing a lot of debt for companies. That has not necessarily yet happened on the sports side. Lenders that have been lending into teams have traditionally been sort of the traditional bank lenders, the large banks. I see there being a real avenue for the private credit lenders, the large funds who are in that business, starting to penetrate the debt side of sports, which I think presents an interesting issue for the leagues and for owners to work through in understanding how sort of funds participation and institutional investors participation in different parts of the capital structure could really come together in ways that are desirable and undesirable, right? The debt lenders typically have superior rights than those that are investing in equity of teams, but if the funds get involved that way, I think it's going to present an interesting issue for the leagues. The other thing that is interesting also to see, it's been publicly reported that, as part of the long-awaited ability for private equity firms to invest in the NFL did something that other leagues did not, which is sort of indicate that they would like to participate in the upside that private equity firms get from their investments as part of making them. And I think that we'll see other leagues penetrate into that as well, which may in turn lead to sort of allowing increased stakes from financial investors into teams, and therefore drive additional institutional investors to invest.
For me, the wake-up moment on the way to think about capital and sports franchise ownership was really when the purchase, the sale of the Dodgers, the last one, when Guggenheim said, look, we're going to pay $2 billion, which was a crazy number in that moment. But you also had to step back and think, well, they're just able to park $2 billion they've got here over there, and now this is an asset class that will grow at a rate that can give you the return that you could get somewhere else, and you get these added benefits of being in that space. And it's hard to analogize for yourself. Where could you park money that you don't necessarily need? Maybe it's your 401k or whatever it is, and you're going to get a return. But you happen to be able to also. We were talking about the Forbes numbers. I don't really care what the Forbes number is. This thing's it's gonna work. It's just a matter if I can sit in there long enough to get the return that I want to get, and I have the assets to do it. So it's a whole different space from what it used to be, from the private investor on, I need this return, I need cash flow, I need all this sort of stuff. It's, do I have the cash and do I have the time, and is this asset what I believe it to be?
I think that's a great example. I was at Sherman and Sterling at that time, representing another bidder group in the Dodgers transaction, and the way Guggenheim came in and funded that transaction and the structure. I think it was a real turning point in franchise investing and opening up the different possibilities, and that valuation jump that the Dodgers showed at that time. I think that's a I think, a watershed moment. And people also forget too, the team was in bankruptcy at the time. When you talk about, private credit lenders coming in, I mean, the bankruptcy rights are a little bit more challenged in the sports franchise world. It's hard to believe that any franchise could ever go bankrupt. But that was a pretty amazing moment, I think, for pro sports investing for sure.
So as we wrap up this really valuable panel, in a couple of sentences, I know we only have a couple minutes, what advice could you provide to new lawyers, law students, even non-lawyers about entering this space? What can they expect? What are some pitfalls that you see? Any advice you can give?
I'll kick off. I think every time I've heard the term sports lawyer, I really ask the student to focus on that second word. Shockingly, no one is calling me up asking me, who they should be drafting or what kind of offensive scheme they want. At the end of the day, everybody that's a lawyer in the NFL or clubs, you're practicing law. And as the lawyers in the room know, what we sell is our time, and you're going to spend most of your waking hours doing it. And so if you hate litigation or if you hate transactional work, it's not going to miraculously become better because you're working in sports. So the key, what I would tell every aspiring law student, figure out what your passion is and marry that up with what your skill set is. And there's going to be a job for you in sports. There's a million different ways. There's with leagues, clubs, adjacent, and you'll find it. But it's really imperative that you are really bright-eyed and clear-eyed about your own interests, your own skills, and then embark upon that and develop the talents. Because at the end of the day, we're being paid to be lawyers, not watch sports.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think you need to be good at what you do. Become an expert at what it is that you're doing as a lawyer. Be the best that can possibly be found out there. Have the greatest attention to detail. Be smarter than the other people. Compete harder. The people who are successful enough to own sports franchises are incredibly intelligent, wildly successful, and incredibly demanding. And you won't even get in the door, let alone succeed and have a long-term career if you're not the best at what you do in order to be recognized by them and to get into their orbit to work on those franchises.
As I said before, I'm not a lawyer, so I take most of my advice from lawyers. But the thing I'll say, just as a professional, everything they said, obviously look at what they've done, and I think it just even resonates as I've kind of started in my career about being great at what you do, trying to focus on the job and executing before anything else. But as you do that, you may fall into jobs initially that you may not want to be doing, or you may decide to pivot later on, even if it's within the legal scope or not, and you're using those skill sets later. So I think building your network as you're doing that is important, and I know you've probably heard that many times, but it really is key. And understanding where transferable skills can be, because I think, again, you have that core skill set as lawyers or prospective lawyers, but you may be a litigator, you may be a general counsel member, you may be in the middle of private equity doing M&A deals or doing M&A deals, whatever the case may be. So I think just as a general overview, that's really key. And then look, like we deal with financial advisors in our business, and I mentioned that lawyers and financial advisors deal with each other all the time in that scope. Trust and integrity are key no matter what you do, and I can't stress that enough.
Just to add on to what the other panelists were mentioning, I completely agree with the fundamental notion is that, as a law student, you went to law school to be a lawyer. I gave a flavor of this in what I was mentioning earlier, but at the end of the day, a large number of sports, law things are just sort of doing legal work that is present in other industries as well. So even if you're not starting off your experience doing something in sports, the skills are largely transferable. Keep an open mind. Dedicate, sort of your time the same way to other industry work as you would to sports, because at the end of the day, in my example, M&A work is still, I'm still working on a purchase agreement, whether it be for a pharma company or for a sports team. A lot of the skills are transferable. Some of the themes change, but a lot of the skills are the same. So whatever industry you start in, hone in on those skills, even if it's not sports to start.
Yeah, I got to echo the be a good lawyer. I look back at my life be a competent lawyer. I don't know how good I was. Be a good lawyer. That I was at a firm for a couple of years, and as I mentioned, I was kind of stuck out there for a couple of years on my own. Had I not learned how to do litigation, had I not learned how to do some transactional stuff, would have been trouble. So it's such a valuable skill to have in general, but it's also a much better answer. What do you do? I do litigation. Then I'm a sports lawyer, which nobody knows what that is. Maybe more importantly, relationships. It is, my journey in this business has so much been built on knowing people and doing my best to treat people the right way, but also remembering how people treat me. So it's so important that the small things, the thank yous, all that stuff really does pay off in the end. I can tell you story after story where I end up getting some work from somebody that I didn't expect would come because of the relationship. And finally, really do be cautious about the jobs that you take. Really do think about where that's going to take you next. You don't always know if you're making the right decision, but really give it some time. In my kind of dead period after the Olympic Games, I think about I had a great opportunity to sell sweets at the Forum, and I'm thinking, is this the way I want to get into sports, or should I do something else? And I don't know where that path would have taken me, but it was like the one job that had the label sports on it. But for me, it turned out it was not the right thing. So think about, can you build up your career doing something else and then find your way back in rather than taking something that doesn't really fit you.
Thank you, guys.